Special Prosecutor Robert Mueller is laying out the predicate for a wide-ranging conspiracy case that will likely ensnare the president's family and, quite likely, Trump himself. Those are the words of a former deputy special prosecutor during the George W. Bush administration in the Scooter Libby case, Peter Zeidenberg. That line appears in his op-ed piece today in USA Today, in which he says we should, quote, expect to see a case of conspiracy to interfere with the 2016 election to be laid out in court. Peter Zeidenberg agrees with the point Rachel made so forcefully Friday night that Michael Cohen's new guilty plea last week of lying to Congress about how long he was working on the Trump Tower deal in Moscow is the key development in what is to come next in the Mueller investigation. Zeidenberg says that Cohen's new plea deal, quote, provides a key ingredient, motive. For those who long wondered why throughout the presidential campaign Trump could not bring himself to say a critical word about Russian President Vladimir Putin, we now know the answer. Trump was hoping to do business in Russia, and doing so would require the approval of Putin. Once Trump repeatedly and publicly denied having any business interests in Russia, Putin had leverage over Trump because he knew this claim was an easily disprovable lie. Cohen's disclosure exposes not just Trump as having lied about his business interests in Russia, it potentially also exposes his family as well. Donald Trump Jr. and Jared Kushner have both testified before Congress. Robert Mueller wrote in the criminal information filing last week that Michael Cohen, quote, briefed family members of Donald Trump on the Trump Tower Moscow project. Zeidenberg writes, Trump Jr. was asked about his role in the negotiations about building Trump Tower Moscow, and while a transcript of Kushner's testimony has not been made public, it is hard to imagine that he was not also asked about the Trump organization's business ties to Russia. Joining us now is the author of that op-ed piece, Peter Zeidenberg. Thank you very much for joining us tonight. Make your case on why you believe that Special Prosecutor Robert Mueller is working on a wide-ranging conspiracy. You make the point that collusion's not a legal term, a wide-ranging conspiracy that involves the Trump family.
Well, as to the conspiracy itself, I mean, there's been several dozen indictments of Russians who were charged with 371 conspiracy. It's a conspiracy against the United States for unlawfully interfering with the functioning of the 2016 election. So we know that Robert Mueller believes that this conduct violates U.S. conspiracy law. Now, the question is, did they conspire with anyone? So that's what I mean, that they're building this piece by piece. We already understand that he believes there's a legal basis for it, because a lot of people have been saying, well, it's not illegal even if they did it. Well, Robert Mueller disagrees with that. So what I think we're going to see possibly within the next few days, when Robert Mueller files his pleadings regarding Manafort and on why the prosecutor feels Manafort's been lying, is they're going to be laying out in that a great deal of facts. And I think that those facts are going to start pointing the fingers at people closer and closer to President Trump, including his family. And I think that, like a lot of people, I think that meeting in June in Trump Tower is going to be a focus of the government prosecution.
You make the point in your article that the filings that Robert Mueller intends to do in the Manafort case provide him with an opportunity to do what you call an end run around Matthew Whitaker, who has been installed by Donald Trump as the acting attorney general. What do you mean by that?
Well, what I mean is, under the statute, the report that Mueller is supposed to write goes to the attorney general. And I think a lot of people, myself included, have concerns about whether the Attorney General will release that. Now, with the Democratic House, perhaps it can be subpoenaed. Maybe they'll fight that. But at least there's a legitimate question about whether that will be made public. This opportunity in open court would be a way of getting a lot of those facts, not a 100-page report certainly, but significant factual predicate for why Robert Mueller believes Paul Manafort has been lying. This is going to be a contested issue. Manafort's attorneys are going to say, no, our guy was telling the truth all along. So this is Mueller has got very good reason for putting in chapter and verse what was asked, what was answered, and what the facts are, which lead Bob Mueller to say he's been lying to us. And I expect that that will include emails, text messages, bank records, and other witness statements to support his contention that Manafort has been lying to them in their debriefings.
Peter Zeidenberg, thank you very much for joining us tonight. Appreciate it. Thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. Subscribe by clicking on the button below for more from The Last Word and the rest of MSNBC.